So everybody online, just nod. I can see a couple of faces. Can you hear and see us okay? Yeah, I guess that's fine. Okay, so I think we'll get started. If anybody online is having problems, just message us in the chat and we'll try and resolve it. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Apologies, we got apologies from Graham James, who sadly has COVID, and we wish him better, but that's the only one. We're also delighted to see Steve Pugh here in person, and Farid, I think, online. Can't see her.
We're hoping that she'll
she'll come in person.
She's just been delayed.
Great. As usual, just to let everyone know that today's meeting is being recorded in the interest of transparency, and the recording will be placed on the HFEA website after the conclusion of the meeting. And obviously we've got some external observers online, and you're all very, very welcome. Declarations of interest, just before I go to that, Catherine Seddon, Alison McTavish and Francis Flinter have previously had declarations of interest which we now consider no longer relevant, so they won't be declaring. Tim does not have a conflict of interest at present, so I think it's just Gita and Jason.
Yep, so I'm person responsible in the Licence Centre.
Thank you. And Gita?
Licence holder and clinician in Licence Centre.
Great. Thanks very much. So now we come to the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of September. Firstly, are there any comments on the minutes? Looking around the room. No. Sorry? No. In which case I will approve them, and they'll be filed. And matters arising, I'm not going to deal with, they're either all completed or dealt with in the body of the meeting, so we don't need to concern ourselves with them now. Sorry, I realised I didn't have my mic on. Apologies. So now we come to the Chair and Chief Exec's report, which set out the key external activities that both I and Peter carried out since the last meeting. They're all set out in the paper, but specifically I wanted to mention a couple of things. Firstly, I'm absolutely delighted that yesterday we published our proposals for law reform, which have also now been delivered to the Department of Health and Social Care. This has marked it's really the end of the first stage of our work on reform. I wouldn't paraphrase a phrase, but it's not really the beginning of the end, but I think it is the end of the beginning. And I think also I'd like to pay tribute to Peter, Claire, Rachel, the whole SMT team, and everybody who was involved in getting us to this stage, including our stakeholders, because it's been an enormous amount of work. And I think the proposals are in good shape. And now looking ahead, we need to build some consensus on the main areas that need to change, and we will be entering into discussions with our stakeholders, interested parties, external people, and so on, and taking us through to the next stage. Interestingly enough, you may have noticed that when we launched it yesterday, we had some really good press interest, which, given what else is going on in the world, we were delighted to get. Peter was very ably interviewed on Radio 4, but it's interesting that most of the press interest has been around our views on donor anonymity, actually, which I just thought was interesting. So that's that. As for me, I've had a number of meetings. In particular, Peter and I met last week with Fertilis, which is an organisation that brings together large clinic groups in the UK. They send representatives. We meet them regularly to discuss a wide range of topics, to hear some of their concerns. We talk about what's working, perhaps what's not working so well. It's a very positive meeting, and we'll continue to do that. And I've got two important speeches coming up, which I'm really hoping will help define our approach to law reform and, again, be part of opening the conversation. The first is at the PET conference in early December. And secondly, the Fertility 2024, which is the main sort of clinical fertility conference, which will be in Edinburgh in January. And at both those conferences, I'll be speaking about our approach to law reform and what we hope to achieve with it. So I think that's a good segue into much wider discussions later on in the year. I'll hand over to Peter.
Thank you, Julia. Like Julia, I've got a list of meetings there, which I'll touch on in a minute, but just something to say at the outset. You'll see an item on the agenda later on the Public Bodies Review. That was put on the assumption that the review would have been public by now. I understand, although the review is finished, that will be a little later than planned. So given that it's not possible to have a conversation about the actions going forward, we'll withdraw that item from the agenda later on, and I will of course give you as much notice as I can as to when the review itself will be published. A couple of things. Number of meetings obviously there, but two I wanted to draw out, but happy to take wider questions. One of which I was lucky enough to be at a conference about embryo research in Berlin a few weeks ago. And I draw two sort of conclusions from this, one of which is the extraordinarily high esteem with which the UK regime is held. I was very struck just how often the answer to the problems in Germany appeared to be, if only we had a system rather like the UK. But I think the other of which was some very important distinctions that seems to me to have underlined why the UK has actually been a world leader in this field. And there is clearly something about the way in which, not just the way in which the law was developed in this country through obviously the famous Warnock Report and then the Act itself, but also the way in which that Act formulates, if you like, the legal framework that then justifies research on embryos. And that's a remarkably different framework to one that exists in a country like Germany with a written constitution and the rest of it. And that very flexibility of a legal framework in the UK, I think, has been absolutely instrumental in terms of allowing the UK to develop in the way that it does. And I think it's also that same grounding and flexibility that will allow us, if the government makes a decision on law reform, to actually build on the settlement we've already got. And I was very, very struck by that, as I say, I mean, an enormously high regard in which the regime as a whole is held over there. The other thing I wanted to mention was just, I also attended a workshop organised by the Science and Policy Group up at Cambridge about embryo-like models. You'll know this is something, again, we touched on in the law reform work. They're currently not, they fall outside of regulation. And there is some important work going on in that group to develop, if you like, a voluntary code with which scientists interested in the field might agree to abide by. Again, we referenced that work in the law reform work, but I think it for me emphasised something which I know you as a board have been wrestling with for the last couple of years, which is just this sense that there are elements of our legal framework which are just now being tested like never before. That things that 5 years ago seemed a long way off are now looking really very imminent indeed, and asking quite searching questions of the regulatory framework. I think it's really important we continue to be involved in these kind of debates, and I'll keep you up to speed with where that sort of voluntary work is going. I think in time there is a bigger question clearly for government about whether or not it also wants to put some kind of statutory underpinning to that work, but it's definitely one to watch. So that's all I wanted to draw out from this at this stage, but I'm very happy to take any questions from members on any of those issues or indeed anything else that's
Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Julie. I wanted to ask about the Real Challenge annual lecture on NHS.
Sorry, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry, I wanted to ask about the Real Challenge annual lecture on NHS at 100, and whether there was anything thematic that came from that that would factor into our developing thinking about the next strategy.
Thanks, Catherine. I think there is. So, yes, the Nuffield Foundation, which as many of you know is a well-established health think tank, has an annual lecture which invites quite an eminent speaker to come along and usually ask some fairly big questions. This year was Professor Diana Coyle, who's an economist, particularly an economist interested in things like public sector productivity, not a health specialist. And that's the sort of where the lecture started from. If the materials become available, I'll circulate it to members. What struck me about this, and obviously a lot of this is about big picture NHS stuff, which I won't repeat. What seemed crucial, I think, and very relevant for our strategy discussions is the better use of data. Not just as a tool for driving efficiencies, but also, I think, for thinking about new services, new ways of regulating and things like that. It has been a long, ambitious ambition of ours in the PRISM work that when the work is complete, one of the things we want to do, and Catherine, you'll know this because of your role at AGC, is actually stand back and have a sort of value for money look at this. Not just in terms of the project itself, but crucially, to what extent does the data we hold and the more accessible way in which we hold the data under PRISM allow us then to think about more efficient ways of organising our own business. And I think that's the key lesson from the perspective of the HFEA I took from the lecture, in which there is a lot of evidence that suggests that one of the ways in which you can up productivity in the public sector is by using your data assets in a much more thoughtful way. We've always, as I say, had ambitions in that direction, but I think that's something we could reflect on in a rather profound way over the coming months, really. But if I get a copy of the slides, I will circulate them to members.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Peter, it's actually, you can watch on the website.
Oh, brilliant.
The full
Great.
lecture if you've got an
I'll send the link round.
Great. Thanks, Peter. So now we come to the committee chair's report. As we always ask committee chairs to report on any committees that have met since the last board meeting. Actually, we have a full house of committees actually that met since September. So let's start with Alison Marsden, chair of the Licence Committee.
Thank you, Julia. I don't have any significant updates to offer, but I do want to just stress again that we are, I think, as a committee, very pleased to see the impact of the work of the inspector and also some of our recent decisions in some centres with really improved compliance. So very encouraging to actually see where the system is really making a difference.
Great. Thank you. Jonathan on SAC, Statute Approvals Committee.
Thank you, Julia. And you've got the statistics on the outcomes of our meetings. But as usual, I thought it might be helpful just to give you a sense of a flavour of some of the things we do. And what I say about our job is if we do licence a condition is to prepare a definition of that condition that can be understood by a lay member of the public. And so this is very important for transparency purposes, because there may be people who are concerned that the committee may be slipping into eugenics or not properly applying our statutory test. And so it's really important that members of the public can, in an accessible way, read about the condition and understand why we've decided in the worst case scenario it can constitute significant disability. And we're fortunate enough to be able to draw on expert scientific papers, as well as the executive who often provide a helpful summary which we can use as a guide, and also comments from the public and the Genetic Alliance as to the lived experience of people with these conditions, to hopefully produce short summaries which can be understood by interested members of the public.
Thank you. Tim on SCAC.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia.
No, the big one.
Thank you, Julia. Yes, we met on the 2nd of October, and we reviewed health outcomes in children born from ART and decided to continue watching that area very closely. We had 2 external speakers, one from Edinburgh and one from Oxford, on in vitro derived gametes, which was extremely interesting, particularly in terms of, I think, quite a wake-up call in terms of how close perhaps this is to actually applications coming into to use these processes. We went on to discuss artificial oocyte activation, which has been removed as one of the add-ons because it is an authorised process and is now professional guidance on AOA. We did plan to speak on the impact of the microbiome on fertility treatment, but I think due to a fire alarm that was cut short, and so that was discussed afterwards by email amongst the committee, and again a watchful waiting brief from there. Thank you.
And Catherine on AGC.
Thank you. So one of the things that AGC has been looking at over the last year is the question of our relationship with internal audit and how better we might address that. So at the October meeting, we agreed a review of the approach and responsibilities and evidence for closing off recommendations and how to agree the evidence for closing off recommendations. And we set a target of 12 months to get to a steady state whereby the only outstanding internal audit recommendations are those relating to the most recent audits. And we also agreed with exec and internal audit colleagues that exec should feel able to bring to AGC for consideration any recommendations that they don't intend to close off on grounds of proportionality or because they're content to accept risk. Peter led us a very useful deep dive on legal risks with discussion around sufficiency of grant mitigation, sufficiency of oversight, and options for the resources model to address legal risks. And we agreed that the exec would update us as and when there's any shift in the most likely type of legal challenge that we face. We got a high degree of assurance on the updated plan for delivery of OTR and Kafka through PRISM and the mitigations that are ensuring that those target dates are met. And last but not least, we got a very helpful paper from Tom on the evaluation of current position with respect to compliance with government functional standards and the plan for further progress, which will be subject to internal audit in 24-25. And 2 quick updates from me, if I may. The first is just to flag an invitation to all authority members that AGC is holding a training on best practice in governance after the AGC meeting on the 7th of December, and anyone is welcome to join. It's 1:15 for an hour and a half, and there'll be an option to join remotely as well as in person, so do please think about that. And secondly, I just wanted to say that we've been invited to present at the departmental audit meeting at the beginning of December, and I'm going to accompany Tom and Peter to discuss departmentally what are our risks and challenges and opportunities. Absolutely.
Thank you. Any questions for any of the committee chairs? No? Thank you very much, chairs. As always, our committees are really part of our sort of lifeblood, and they run very well and they do very important work, and it's a lot of work. So we're very grateful to the chairs and their committees for the work that they do. Right, performance report. So as everyone will recall, we look at this at every board meeting, and we invite the CEO, Peter, together with different members of the SMT, and I think it'll be Rachel and Claire this time, to discuss various bits of the report that you've got before you in the papers. So start with Peter.
Thanks, Julia. I usually also take this opportunity to say something about PRISM, given the sort of centrality to so much about what we're trying to do. So PRISM is now well established and working. We're just in the process of bringing the last 3 clinics on board. That process has started. The error rate is at an average level across clinics down at 3.4. That compares with anecdotally an error rate under the old system, certainly around about 10%. But they are unevenly distributed. The good clinics are at 1% or less in errors. We have 33 clinics, so getting on for a third of them, they have error rates greater than 4, and in some cases with larger numbers. So it's really vital that we get those error rates down to the levels of the best. So we are now, rather than just doing a generalised approach with clinics where we sort of make exhortations to all clinics to sort out their errors, clearly if you're at a kind of 1% level or something, you don't need a lecture from us on fixing errors. But what we are now doing is a much more targeted approach to those clinics that have problems. They are distributed amongst different EPRS systems. The PRISM system on a whole gives a much better error rate than the others. So we are talking to clinics about that. And that's not just a question of, it's good to have the error rate down. It is vital to the updating of our tutor fertility clinic function, which because of the shift on PRISM is now much more out of date than it used to be. And obviously this is really important information for patients. That process of updating has begun. There is the first steps, as it says there in the paper, should be completed before December, and then we start to communicate with the sector what the work is that's required to complete it. So I think I've said before, and I certainly said so to the audit committee, this first update is very much more work in 2 senses than will be going forward. One of which is there's been a big gap, so there's a lot of data to validate. The other of which is we are validating data that was submitted under the old system in the new system, which is just a bit more complicated. Once we've got back up to the date, we're then using, we're validating data that was submitted under PRISM, and that should be a very much easier task. So it is a bit of it's one last final struggle. One thing to also just draw the board's attention to is that one of the other things we hope by shifting over to the new database structure is that would be easier to do things and manipulate our data, and so this is proved. Anybody who runs a clinic will know that monitoring what's called the 10 family limit, so this is the number of families that have been created with donor gametes, can at times be quite complex. Particularly where gametes move from one clinic to another. And we have now created a report which we can do in the new system, which makes it much easier to track that. So I think, and that is one example of the way in which having the data in this new database, it all sounds very technical, but the point is, it's not just about getting the data into a much more sort of stable footing, but actually we can do things with it, important things with it. So that's really welcome news. In terms of performance more generally, before I hand over to colleagues, you can see the picture there on KPIs: 7 green, 3 amber, 4 red, and 3 neutral. I usually take this opportunity to talk to you about the HR data. Again, staff sickness remains high. We've talked about this before. It is the same old issue, though, of a relatively small organisation with a very few number of people who have long-term sick problems, and that skews the figures. And as I say, they're very distinct. I think you've asked questions before, quite rightly, about whether that's an issue about workload or something. In these cases, we don't think it is. They are very distinct health issues. Turnover, though high, is down a bit, so we've moved it from red to amber, and our headcount is currently, we are pretty much full, and I want to pay tribute actually to the HR staff, but staff more generally as well, where where we get vacancies now, we really do work hard to get the adverts out quickly and fill them quickly, and that's, with a stretched small workforce, that's really important, and I think there's evidence we're doing that more efficiently. That's all I want to say at this time. Happy to take any questions, or if there aren't any, to hand over to colleagues.
It's only a comment from me. I'm delighted about the error rate going down for PRISM.
I think so.
Oh, is it gone? Apologies. It's really good to hear about the development and performance of PRISM and getting the error rate down, because I know how hard it is for clinics as well as for the HFEA. So it's hard work for everybody and really very well done for the whole sector. And I know other performance will be done, but there are lots of greens there as regards to inspections, PGTM processing, including lots of, including answering emails and PQs and FOIs, all 100% within target. And I just want to say, congratulations to the entire team for achieving that.
Thank you, Geeta. All I'd say about the error rate as well, this is the conversation we were having with clinics. In some circumstances, there are very local issues, but what's striking is, regardless of the system, there is variation in clinic performance, which suggests to me these are not technical system issues, these are human error type issues. So, if there are 10 clinics using a particular system, some of them are at 1% and some of them are at 5%, it can't be the system.
Yeah.
So there is something here about having a conversation with those clinics that are struggling and trying to get them to see what the really high-performing clinics are doing and so on. In a way, this is almost like maintenance work in a way. If you do it regularly and keep on top of it, actually this is a very manageable task. Where it becomes difficult is that clinics don't attend to good data entry, and then they have a big job of fixing those errors. So it is getting into an ongoing maintenance mindset rather than just I'll do it at the point of validation, because all that does is create an awful lot of work for people, both at the clinic and with us. So, but there's pockets of very good practice everywhere. We just need to get everybody into the same place.
Catherine.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask about OTR. I'm very well aware that the current OTR team have had huge pressures, huge demands on them, and in particular to the run-up of our significant advertising and marketing the opportunities brought about by the change in the law starting from the latter part of 2023 onwards in terms of applications to access information about donors. One request, if I may, and two questions. The request is it possible from here on in the performance reports to include a log of the time elapsed from OTR application to an OTR being sent out? Because I know this is something that the authority has been concerned about, and obviously it would be helpful to be able to give themselves assurance that it's not worsening as time goes on. And somewhat relatedly, given the increase latterly, expected increase latterly in applications, are there any current concerns about either our capacity to respond to projected need for 24 onwards, or any concerns about shift in the projected timescale for clearing the backlog?
Rachel, do you want to?
Yeah, obviously the OTR team has been having an increase in applications, and within the small team we have had extra resource from the register team to help support and give an extra person to do that. The focus hasn't been able to be solely on completing the applications because we've done the development work in our new case management system. So over the summer there was a lot of training, there was a lot of testing. That is working well now. We know that we're getting positive feedback from them. We also are in the final stages, the final tweaks of the RETA tool, the register tool, being able to draw that information out, which will also save time on the amount of time, make it more time efficient for the team to do that. There's final training and some further development work, but we are very nearly there with that completion. Once all that's in place, and we're also sort of discussing internally more operational issues and resourcing for it, going forward we will then be able to have much clearer reporting mechanisms. It may be that we streamline the different applications and report on them differently. It's a piece of work that we're doing internally at the moment, so it will give a clearer picture. At the moment, the position is that we are receiving an incredible amount of applications, which is obviously as a result of the comms strategy at the moment. So, for example, last month we had 136, which is nearly double the amount we normally have. But there are also benefits of the comms, that we've had 8 donors remove their anonymity, which is hugely positive from this. So I think we've just got to make sure we can focus on getting all the tools in place, and then working out how we're going to manage the waiting times. Because at the moment, yes, we say it's 6 to 8 months, which isn't acceptable. We do want to get it lower. There are processing times within that. Nobody would be able to apply on a Monday and get the information out within a couple of weeks, because we give a clinic 28 days to respond, a donor, if it's identifiable information, 20 days notice that the information is going out. So there are always time constraints within that. But yes, the aim is, with the work that we're doing internally over the next month or so, to try and have a better understanding of the different weights, the different processing times using the new systems, and then how we can resource and manage those better.
Thank you. Rachel, do you want to... Peter, have you finished?
I've finished. No more questions.
So we'll hand over to Rachel.
Yeah, so obviously I've just done the OTR side of things. The team are, like I said, incredibly stretched at the moment, but they will be from next month really focused on doing applications, because all the development work will have been finished. So I'm sure next month we will see quite a significant amount of applications being closed. I know over the last few weeks we've got nearly 130 applications being worked on at the moment, so that's a lot higher than it's been in the past. From a compliance perspective, we've still got long-term absence, we've got new staff members, so it's still impacting slightly on the KPIs, but the new inspectors are settling in well to their posts and the training is going well, and they've already been out on inspections and taking responsibility for their own portfolios, which is very positive. But we still do have staff turnover. We just recently had someone hand their notice in, and we're out to recruit now for a scientific inspector. But hopefully, again, once we get stability in the team, we will see a difference. Although I do know there was a slight improvement in the KPIs for the inspection reports this time. And then just on a wider mention about the IT in my directorate, we've done an independent data backup audit, and we're continuing to monitor the changes that this has done for the frequency of our data backups and retention periods. And we will report this, obviously, what we do through the AGC. We've done a security penetration test, and we've now got the recommendations from that, and we will work through those to make sure that if there are any vulnerabilities highlighted, that we've got measures to put in place to ensure that we're safe going forward. We're working currently on our business continuity plans, and this has been drafted, and we've now worked up a critical incident management plan, and it's in review stage at the moment. Hopefully we'll be finished by the end of the year. We continue hard to work, Alice, in information governance, and Martin and Carl on the DSPT. We've started to look at next year's submission, what information requirements we need to do. As you're all aware, the requirements seem to get more demanding each year, with more issues to be able to address. And then finally, we are looking at widely across the systems of the system that we use to maintain our statutory functions, such as inspection and licensing, and we're recognising that we will have to draft business cases and work out how we can move forward to replace that.
Any questions for Rachel? Okay, Claire, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Julia. I've got quite a few things, so I'll skip through them and feel free to interrupt at any point. Firstly, it was brought to our attention over the weekend that NHS England has published information that they were stopping funding arrangements with PGTM. It's our understanding that this is an error. We've had clarification that the commissioning arrangements are unchanged, and NHS England have apologised for the concern and confusion this has caused. We will be following that up to ensure that it was an error. And just to shed some light, about 600 to 700 patients a year have PGTM, which we know is successful, cost effective, it removes their chances of having a child with significant hereditary disease, not only for that family, but for the families in the future. And examples of diseases that people will be aware of are things like Huntington's disease and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So if we have any more updates on that, we'll let authority members know. Secondly, the government recently announced an update to the law that the current situation where people in what we call shared motherhood arrangements are screened as donors will end, as well as enabling those with an undetectable viral load who are HFEA positive to become gamete donors. We've given some information via our Clinic Focus article to licensed clinics and also to our stakeholder groups. As the law stands today, it is still in place, although we understand. We hope to hear more about a timetable for change on that and more as and when we have it. As Julia mentioned, we published our proposals on law reform yesterday. We had, given that it was quite a busy news day yesterday, there were over 260 pieces of media coverage, which I think is very helpful. As Julia said, focusing particularly on changes the authority recommended on donor anonymity. And the response from the department that was published said that we asked the HFEA to undertake a stakeholder consultation about the priorities for reform, as we recognise legislation needs to be modernised and are grateful they have undertaken this work. The report raises important issues about considering regulatory powers that better protect fertility patients and the quality of the service they receive. So I think that's a really helpful reply from the department, and we look forward to continuing the work on that area over the next 12 months and beyond. Later this month, the last publication of the year, will be publishing our Ethnic Diversity and Fertility Treatment Report. Thank you for those authority members who've given us input on that. And we'll also be working with other groups such as the BFS and the RCOG to issue a call to action and working very closely with Peter on that. At the same time, we will also be publishing on our website our first go at data dashboards. Thank you to everyone in the intelligence team for this. So hopefully this will be a way, whether it is members of clinic staff, patients, researchers can use data and look at the data themselves on desktops or laptops in a way that is easier than it has been previously. A couple of other updates. Thank you very much to Steve and to Fahir also in the department for helping us with the publication of the Code of Practice. We just got that in just at the end of October, so that's been published. The sector will have all been notified by Chair's letter, Special Edition Clinic Focus. So that's now been laid in Parliament. We also published in October our add-ons work, which I know Dean is going to be talking about later on in the meeting. And lastly, we've just had one of our two stakeholder group meetings of the patient organisation and stakeholder group we had last week, where we worked with a number of patient organisations. We had a general update about our work and their work, and we also gave a specific update on the Who Is My Donor campaign and the next steps in that work, the add-ons work, and an overview of the Ethnic Diversity and Fertility Treatment Report. And later this month, we've got this similar meeting with our professional stakeholder group.
Any questions for Claire? No. Thank you, Claire. I mean, there's a lot going on there, but it's all going well. So thank you. Tom, overview of the financial performance.
Thanks. Yeah. Our bottom line was broadly the same at the end of September as it was at the end of July, which is the position we reported at the last authority meeting, with a forecast overspend or deficit of about just under £100,000. I've just had the numbers in for October, and it's remaining at the same level. Behind this, our forecast income has dropped, but our forecast expenditure has also dropped. So we're basically spending less than budgeted, but we're raising less than budgeted as well. The real cost pressure is still IT, and we're well above budget on IT spend. Other areas of spend are more or less as expected, and we have some areas of underspend as well. Looking forward, I don't really expect this position to change much. and in fact there may be other pressures that we need to fund. I mean, income may come back up again, but I don't think we can guarantee that. I've discussed this position with the department, so they're aware. They've not requested that we make any corrective action like that at the moment. As ever, we'll monitor the position and adjust where we can, if necessary, in discussion with the department.
Questions for Tom? No. Well, we'll revert to Tom now because we come to our 23-24 budget proposals, which we are asking for a decision from members. As you know, HFEA is funded by a mix of fees from the sector we regulate, so clinics pay us fees, and a grant from the government, sometimes known as grant in aid. And every year we have to set a budget that will obviously influence the level of fees we need to recover, which will help us with our resources and the work we do going forward. This year we've got in front of you an indicative budget and a consequential fee increase, which we're asking you to look at. It's always a little difficult, but our fees have not risen over time, for example, in line with inflation, and at the same time, our grant in aid is going to be reduced, common with many other departments, and at this stage we're really asking for you to look at this and give us your permission to start negotiations with Treasury, really, about what the level of fees should be. I'm going to hand over to Tom, give you a little bit more detail, and then we'll take the decision.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as outlined in the paperwork, we require a larger fee increase than usual in 24-25. And I think those are driven by two key things, really. The first is continuing high levels of inflation. Our costs are increasing quite a lot at the moment. And the other is a pretty significant reduction in grant and aid from the department. Broadly, a kind of core grant and aid is coming down from around 950,000 to around 250,000. There are a few adjustments that need to be finalised with the department. That's broadly the reduction. I mean, I'll just focus on a couple of key points just to then allow some questions. So we expect our costs to grow by around 5% next year. And this is largely driven by inflation, particularly pay costs and costs around IT still. And I think those are pressures that we're managing at the moment, and they're kind of reflected in the financial position this year as well. We're not looking to grow our workforce permanently. That's not what's included in the budget at the moment. But clearly, we will have to consider things like OTR pressures in particular. We do need to fix Epicenter as well, our inspection and licensing IT tool. As advised by the department's finance team, we're going to put in a separate bid for additional grant and aid funding to kind of fund that urgently next year. On fee activity, which is kind of an important part of the calculation as well, there is some variability in that. We're below budget this year by about 1.4%. I've taken an average of the last 3 years, which I think is reasonable. As Julie said, historically, our fees have been higher in the past than we're proposing that we increase them to now. I think we've been quite good at keeping our impact on the sector as low as possible. But this is quite a significant increase. The growth from £85 to £100 for IVF is about 17.5%. So it's quite a lot to kind of put on the sector in one go. I think we're planning on starting a structural fee review next year, which will be a broader discussion with the sector around kind of how our fees are spread fairly across the sector and things like that. But which should help us next year, I think. So if the authority is content with this proposal as a starting point, we'll take this back to the department and get a feel for clarifying exactly what the GIA level will be next year. The acceptability to the department and to Treasury of a fee increase of this level as well, because they will need to approve the proposal, and also to start discussions around epicentre funding as well. And then we'll come back to the authority with that discussion. So is the authority happy to broadly sign off the increase in costs that's included in the paper and what that means for fees, and also happy with us bidding for the epicentre funds?
So let's take questions and then we'll give you an answer. So firstly, Catherine.
Thank you, Tom. I'm not sure, I've got 3 questions. I'm not sure the first one isn't a question for our departmental colleagues. Firstly, do we have any indication what's the likelihood of GIA bid for epicentre succeeding? My second question is it possible to delay agreeing the negotiation regarding the percentage fee increase until we've got an indicative position on the GIA bid? And thirdly, if it's not possible to delay, because we need to socialise the idea with Treasury first, what is the rationale for the more significant, much more significant percentage increase on IVF cycles and a much lower percentage on DI? And could we de-risk ourselves in relation to the GIA bid by reasonably increasing the percentage increase on DI to match the IVF?
Tom, just before you answer that, can we just make it clear that the bid for epicentre is different from the increase in fees? There are 2 separate things, so if you do one, you don't necessarily do the other, or you can do both, but they're not. Yeah.
There may be a bit of crossover on that. If I start with DI, I think the amount of funding that we raise from DI is so small that if we made a more substantial increase in DI, it's not going to make that much difference to us financially. So it's part of the picture, but it's not a significant part of the picture. On departmental funding, this is the thing that I'm most worried about. The department has said that they want us to bid for funding separately. I think funding epicentre through fees is entirely justifiable because it's how we do our business, and I think if we improve the system, then that should also be improvements for the sector as well, particularly things like the portal. So I think it's justifiable. The problem is it's quite a lot of money, and if we put that into fees this year, we will get a big hike in fees, which potentially means that we have more funding than we need in the following year, or we may need to reduce fees. So I think we agree with the department that the proposal to fund it through GIA is less messy. There is a risk that ultimately, and my understanding from the department is that there isn't a lot of funding around and things are very tight this year and next year. I think we'll need to have the discussion quite quickly with the department, both the fees and the business case proposal for epicentre kind of at the same time. I think what I'd like to propose to the department is that this is funding up to a certain amount, and potentially we may not need all of it because it's going to depend on what activity is next year and everything else for the amount of income we raise. So it's a discussion with the department. I think we're quite clear that there's a massive risk if we can't fund it. I think we'd really struggle to fund it with fees of £100 without some support from quite a lot of support from the department. If they tell us quickly that they're not going to be able to fund it separately, then we might need to come back with a slightly different budget, potentially putting the money into fees, because I think we agree there's quite a big risk for the organisation.
Thank you. Alison.
Yeah, the funding for the epicentre is a high priority for the authority, because licensing is the main reason for the HFEA, and that department's really struggling at the moment with the capacity issues that they've got. But when you bring in a new centre, a new IT system, there has to be funding around about supporting the implementation, training, and it's an opportunity to review how inspections take place and an opportunity to review the process of inspections, the reporting of inspections. So this is actually a really key issue for the authority, and I think it's one that has to be quite high priority, but not quite high, it is very high priority, and the funding needs to be secured fairly quickly with a clear plan of how the money is going to be used to meet the needs, and it affects every single centre in the UK. So it has to be quite a clear plan we need to put in place, and I'd quite like to see that done quickly. Thank
Alex.
you.
I was also going to make a point about Epicenter and endorse everything Alison and Catherine have said. You know, you couldn't have more warning signs for an IT system in paragraph 3.2, including developed internally 15 years ago, unsupported. Obviously, you know, we're monitoring cyber, I don't know if it's cloud-based, but it probably isn't, but we're monitoring cyber risks and so on. So I think it sounds like, you know, we would all strongly endorse the fact that this isn't even anywhere near best practice that we should be having in a system that's so fundamental. So I'm sure myself and all members that, you know, will do everything we can to support that bid, because we have to, especially with cyber risks around, we have to have a world-class system in that respect.
Firstly, thank you all for your understanding and support. I think the key thing, I mean, Catherine raises a really good question here. We and the department agree, I think, that with a sort of, to use the jargon, lumpy piece of capital expenditure, we want a lot of money in a short space of time. Kind of one-off grants via, say, GIA is much the better way of doing it. Because we have a fee which is basically a volume transaction-related thing, what it's good at is raising money over time. And what the complication here is, if we are not successful in getting a grant in aid uplift, then the increase in fees has to be quite considerable in order to generate sufficient money quickly enough that we can do the things that Alex has quite rightly drawn attention to. And then we need to drop fees down again, sort of thing, because clearly we don't want to collect more money than we need. And generally, when I talk to the sector, they always seem to say to me that predictability and consistency is much better than a fee that is bouncing around the place from one year to another. So I think, you know, we are very much of a view that the right approach, if at all possible, is a one-off uplift to our grant in aid. But Catherine's right, we do need a plan B. If not, and as Tom said, our view is that paying for the Epicenter replacement and the fee income set at 100, i.e. the proposal in paper, is very, very tight indeed, and probably not a sustainable position.
Thank you. Questions? Gita.
Thank you. This significant reduction in grant in aid is quite disappointing. And I just a question from me as to, is this something that the department is doing across the board to ALBs?
Yeah.
And is the percentage reduction is similar, or is the HFEA getting more hit than others? And yes, of course, we support, you know, the bid for extra grant and funding from the department, because £100 does sound hard for the license fee. And do you have any comparisons, Tom, about the license fees for IVF from international comparators?
No, I don't have any international comparisons. I don't have any comparators, I'm afraid. And I'm still fairly new in post. I need to do a bit more networking to get details with other ALBs. But my understanding is this is a policy of the administration at the moment to for regulators to be funded through fees rather than through central funding. And I'm pretty certain that has impacted on a number of other ALBs. But I'll do a bit more research to find out the details.
Jason and then Zainab.
Just curious, do we have any data plotting the rise in fees against inflation in the last decade or so? So kind of matched inflation or below inflation?
I've
Working out,
So I've tried to do that, but because it's difficult to know when to start. So I think our fees were over £100 in 2011, and they kind of came down a long way, and then they've been flat, and they went a bit like this. I think looking at the increase that we're going back up to now, if you go back to 2016, our increase over that period of time is kind of in line with inflation. If you go back to 2011, then it's still a reduction. So it's quite tricky. It depends on the time scale.
Just following a similar thought process, I was wondering if there's any way to look at how the fee increase might relate to the increase of average costs of IVF cycles, particularly in the private sector, because I think there is obviously a very sensible argument for a fee increase, and that HFEA fee is for clinics, but what tends to often happen is that clinics are putting that on patients' bills specifically as HFEA license fees, so the patients are paying the full fee. But I'm just wondering if we are raising our costs because the cost of everything has increased and actually the clinics are charging more for IVF cycles, shouldn't they be absorbing some more of that increase rather than passing it straight on to patients? And whether there's some way we might be able to encourage that.
Peter, do you want to?
Good question, Sarah. Let me see if I can wrap up a number of things that have been said. Firstly, international comparisons are really difficult because regulations are funded in all sorts of different ways, and indeed we could fund ourselves in different kind of ways. Because as Julia said, at some point we do want to do a much more thoroughgoing look at the fee model, and there are many other options than merely the one we've had to date. So I don't think international comparisons get us terribly far. As Tom said, on the basis of do we match inflation or not, it kind of depends where you measure from. But broadly, our fees have been either held or I'd be very surprised if our fees had outpaced inflation over any length of time. Because we're not a price regulator, I can't give you hard data, Zainab, on the cost of IVF cycles, but my anecdotal sense is they have gone up quite a bit. I'd be very surprised if they'd not increased at a percentage increase which is quite considerably higher than any fee increase, however you measure it over the last 10 to 15 years. And you're absolutely right. So I think for the public record, I know many of your board members know this, but to be clear, we do not levy fees on patients. We levy fees on clinics to cover the cost of regulation as required by Treasury. And we vary that fee on the basis of the size of the clinic. So, and we've done that historically to the date by the volume of activity that the clinic does. So a clinic does 3,000 embryo transfers, has 3,000 times the NHS fee. If you do 1,000, you pay 1/3 of that. It is for the clinics to decide whether or not they explicitly pass that cost on to the patient. Now, clearly, if you're running a private business, all of the costs you incur running a private business have to at some point be reflected in what you charge for the services. What is different about the HFEA with some clinics is there is not, to the best of my knowledge, in a patient bill something that says X% for heating, staff costs, business rates, etc., which are all the costs one incurs when running a business. What many clinics do decide to do is they put on the HFE fee as if it's almost like a service charge when you're in a cafe. Now, that does give patients sometimes a misleading impression that we are levying a fee on them. We are not. That is a decision of clinics. I suppose the other thing I want to say, I in no way want to underestimate a hike in fees from £85 to £100. But typically an IVF cycle is going to be something approaching £4,000 to £5,000, of which either currently 85, and if you agree the proposal and Treasury agree the proposal, 100 would be, if you like, the cost of the security that comes from regulation. Now it is for others to decide whether that's good value or not. But clearly, and I don't wish, we don't want to be putting fees up any more than we have to. But in the context of people having to spend several £1,000s on treatment, an increase in the fee from £85 to £100, though not welcome, is not, I would argue, a barrier to treatment in any kind of way. So I think some kind of perspective in all of this is quite important, without undermining the fact that, you know, we want to keep our fees as low as possible.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I mean, I completely endorse what Peter says, and if we think about how inflation has moved since we last had the last fee increase, I mean, in a way we've sort of not just stood still but fallen behind. So given the work that we have to do, I think it's quite important to recognise that. So Tom, you need a decision from us that we, really that you can start negotiating with Treasury on the basis of the fee of the fee increase proposed, and also to look at a grant for replacing Epicenter. Yeah. So, authority members, is everybody in favour, or is anybody against? No. So I think you've got some unanimous approval, and go and hopefully come back with a good result by the next board meeting or whenever. When do you think you'll have an answer, Tom?
I mean, I can start trying to talk to the department straight away, but it kind of depends on how busy they are. They're doing internal business planning at the moment as well, as quickly as possible.
Okay. Great. Well, keep us posted. So now we come to the, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, Strategic Risk Register. As authority members may remember, we discuss this, I think, twice a year to look at the work which is typically undertaken by the AGC on the Strategic Risk Register, to look at the risks within the business and make sure that we think they're the correct risks on the one hand, and they're also codified correctly as to the level of risk. And I'm going to ask Shabir to just introduce the paper, give us some headline comments and explain where we are, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you, Julia. So in terms of the register itself, a version of this was presented to AGC in October, and a major update of this register will be taking place shortly, and the new version will be presented to AGC in December. For this particular register, few minor updates have been put in, specifically on the information risk, which is specific to OTR, where we acknowledge that the risk that we're operating it under is above tolerance for the reasons that we've already mentioned. It is a major priority for the organisation, so that risk remains. Further risk on our strategy, which is related to the PBR, that will be updated in significantly more detail, and also our security risk, as was described earlier, with some of the penetration testing that's been done, some of the additional cyber security updates. All of those updates will be provided to AGC in December. So the paper gives a very short summary of all of these updates, and as we've done previously, I'm happy to take questions on the actual register itself.
Are there any questions for Shabir? I mean, it'll be the next authority meeting that will have a proper review of the whole risk register and the new register. So this is really just taking the old one, updating it, but it will be completely overhauled. Any questions? No.
Move on.
Okay, thanks, Shabir. I think we can move on, and we will look forward to a really much fuller discussion of the risk register at the next board meeting. Now, again, an item for decision on opening the register. As you know, this is a key year for OTR. We've discussed it many times in this room, and we've had an update on the progress, I think, of all three elements of the project, and I think it's sort of going well. We want at every board meeting, given that this is one of the most sensitive projects I think we're engaged in, and it's a very real and sort of live project since the first cohort of young people born after 2005 have reached the age of 18 sort of nowish. And so I think it's Claire and or Rachel who are going to update us on the progress now.
Yeah, so I spoke about OTR earlier. Since we started the project work, we've had 3 work streams. One is the OTR service, which is looking at the operational aspects. The support service, which has been taken in isolation, we will actually give you an update on the work that's progressed within that project. That will be a good background for when we do the decision in January, and then the comms work that's been going on, which Claire will then update you on. So just basically on the OTR service, you're aware that the case management system has been put in place through Microsoft Dynamics. The team have found that very intuitive to use, and we've had very positive feedback. For example, logging the applications is a lot quicker, and managing them and being able to close them out and actually see real-time data is a lot easier as well. The OTR RETA reports will be the final piece of the jigsaw, which really does bring all the technology together to be able to make these applications work a lot better, and we're in the real final stages of testing and tweaking that to make sure that the reports are out. Obviously, giving the right information that's accurate is absolutely fundamental to an OTR application. So this is why there's been some back and forth between the OTR team and the developers to make sure that this is right. Once we've got that in place, it will be full steam ahead, and we will have true focus from the team on the applications, and we will have then a completed system with new SAPs to work from, and then we'll be able to stand back and look at it more operationally as well. So the support services, Anna Wilkinson will be updated on the work we've done so far on that.
Thanks. If we could just move on to the next one. This is just a summary of where we are on the communications work stream. So as you know, the Who's My Donor campaign went live in September. We achieved a great deal of coverage for that campaign, and we also want to thank the key stakeholders from both our professional and patient organisation support groups, stakeholder groups, who helped publicise that. As you can see, there was a high level of engagement, particularly on social media, but also there's been a lot of views of our updated web pages and our updated clinic FAQs. If we move on to the risks, you can see that one of the risks which we're managing is that the communications campaign is so successful that we have an increase of applications that means we can't match the current level of resource. So I think we're constantly looking about whether we should space out that campaign a bit more than we had planned originally, and making sure that the OTR team are not kind of more overwhelmed by the number of applicants than they are at the moment. Other risks remain as they have been in previous meetings. We've talked previously about the resources, that donor-conceived individuals getting the information may not have the relationship that they might hope for, and that there is a limit in what information we can provide. I think one of the risks we may lower is about clinics information. I think we've been successful in getting information to clinics, particularly through Clinic Focus, but also sessions that Rachel has been running for clinics on the OTR service. So I think there's much higher awareness of the information that we can provide at the moment than there was previously. So I think that's probably all formally from the slides. The next steps are as they have been in previous meetings. So I think Rachel's talked about the final steps on the service itself. We're going to be talking about the support services piece of work in a moment, and the communications campaign will continue for the next few months.
Thanks, Claire. Francis and Alex, yeah.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking about numbers, and I appreciate at the moment, because of the very successful publicity, not everybody who's applying will necessarily have just turned 18. There could be been applications and questions from all sorts of people who are or think they might possibly be donor conceived. But do we know what the average rate is per year, how many individuals are born from donor conception? Because we would eventually expect to reach a sort of steady state that might make it easy to anticipate how many inquiries a month you would get.
Yes and yes is the answer. So when we got to 2019, it was just over 4,000 children were born from donor conception, but that was the highest, and we expect it to continue to about that rate. And we have got, both in our published reports and elsewhere in our press activity, numbers of the numbers who are born from identifiable donors kind of going forward, if that makes sense. So the answer is yes, we do have that information. And I think when there's a decision to be made in the new year about the support services, we'll be using some of those projections as far as I'm aware in terms of the numbers of applicants we're likely to get. Not forgetting we don't know how many of those people know that they're donor conceived.
Rachel, do you want to just come in on that? Yeah.
Going forward over the next few years, there was a transitional period in 2006 which allowed anonymous sperm donors and egg donors still to be used. So if somebody had got frozen embryos created or wanted a sibling pregnancy, they were still having be able to use those samples. So actually within the first year of 2023, there were about 30 individuals who were born from an identifiable donation. That gradually increases over the next few years, but it won't be until several years forward that we see the true impact of the identity release of donation.
Thank you. Alex, yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned before, I was quite worried with publicity we were going to get kind of some fraudulent websites springing up, pay me £100 and you can jump the queue, and we saw that with the ultra-low emissions scheme. There's lots of scams going on. I had a quick look, and I couldn't see any, but I just wondered, I think that should be a risk, and I just wondered if we could add some copy on the website which says, only if you get an email from ends.gov.uk, or, only use this form type thing, because I do think it will happen once people get wind that, this is an emotion, all the TV publicity and everything. We can't control it. Obviously, we need to report any notifications of action, fraud, and all the rest of it. But I just wondered if we could reassure people.
We have included that as a risk on the risk register now, specifically about websites popping up. Martin is actively monitoring it through Google searches to see if there is anything. But yeah, we can put a line on the website. It's a good idea.
Peter.
Just to follow up, Francis, on your point, it's absolutely right. So what we know for each year is how many people are born with whose donor is identifiable. As Claire says, of course, we don't know what proportion of them will then apply to us. But of course, those numbers are not just, although we know per year, there's no time limit on once you've reached 18, you could activate that when you're 35. So the numbers become cumulative in effect, that the remainder for each year joins the next year's numbers, so that number grows. So my sense is that until we've probably been operating this scheme for a number of years, we won't really have a sort of back-of-the-envelope sense that of the numbers of donors who could apply, typically a quarter do, or something like that. And when we reach that sort of steady state, then I think we have a sort of a projection based, if you like, on historical actions that would allow us to say, all other things being equal, given what we know about our system, given what we know about the numbers of donors, we're likely to have this amount of applications in a given year, and therefore that's the kind of work we need to deal with.
And when I've spoken to people in the sector, especially like discussions with DCN, that it's not just when you get to 18 that you'll want this information very often. It's when you get married, when you're faced with a medical issue, when you have your own children. So it's not that we can say, well, when you're 18, it's from 18 that this information can be released, and we don't know. It depends on very individual circumstances when that will be.
Say that.
I just also wanted to make a quick additional point that it wouldn't necessarily be just about the numbers as well. It will also depend on culture change. And we might see that as time goes on, applying for the identity of your donor does become more of a norm or does become more redundant based on what we see over the coming years, so it won't be purely about numbers.
Just one last question from me, which is, we have, and we've discussed it here, had some concerns about the backlog and, taking a little bit more time than we maybe would have liked for information to get to donor-conceived people who make applications. Just, I think it would be good to know how we're doing on that, because I understand it's reducing, but how are we doing on that?
So on the actual numbers?
Well, just as a general principle, is it reducing? Are you feeling it's sort of reducing now, and it's now sort of?
Not currently, because we've obviously had more applications than we've been able to release, and because the focus has been on testing, training, implementing the new IT changes, which we will see benefit from. At the moment, no, we haven't seen improvement, but going forward, now we've got the case management system, final testing of the RETA tools. When we draw all that together, and as from next month, we will be able to process a lot more applications. And we're also, as I said earlier, doing some internal working on operational aspects to try and just take a step back now. We've got a bit of space because everything's in place to look at how we can manage the different streams and how we think about that. And I think that will help us inform authority a lot clearer in the future around waiting times and the numbers on waiting lists.
Good. Thank you, Rachel. I mean, that's good to hear. And I think it's this, again, this is a sort of standing item on the authority agenda, a meeting agenda, and it probably should remain there, looking at all aspects of it for the time being, because it seems, it's one of the most important things that we're doing. It's great. So moving on, and still on the subject of OTR, as you know, we've all discussed at the last meeting, last couple of meetings of you on how we should be providing, or who should be providing support services around OTR. I think final decisions are not for now. I think we're going to deal with that in the new year, but we thought it would be good to actually hear what the progress is and what work's been completed. So I'd like to ask Anna if she'd just like to update us. Thank you, Anna. Couldn't see you over there, just behind somebody.
So we thought it would be a good idea to just give you a quick update. This presentation is really just for information purposes, to give you an overview of where we're up to so far. So as you know, we've been exploring some possible options for sustainably funding support services in the future, and that includes the option that we don't continue to fund support. We're trying to look quite widely at the options. Just a bit of a recap. No, I'm not on that one back yet, sorry. So yeah, just so we're all on the same page. The support service is used by a subset of donor-conceived people and donors. So it's those people that want to access counselling or intermediary services. What we're doing, so there are a number of strands, and I don't want to go into too much detail. You can see in the slide, so we'll just go through those fairly quickly. The purpose of this is really just to set the scene for the January meeting when we're going to submit a fuller paper with more detail. Okay, so yeah, just to remind you, was there one before that? Sorry, it should be is that the second? Okay. Yes, that's right. So we've been commissioning, or we did commission the fertility, the Hewitt Centre in 2019. So they've been providing support services. When I say support, support in this context is implications counselling and intermediary services, which is a few different things. So that can be mediated face-to-face contact between donor-conceived people and donors, and they also run a letterbox service which facilitates anonymous contact between donors and donor-conceived people. That's what the Hewitt's doing. There are other forms of support as well, such as peer support, or, information, signposting to other organisations. But as far as the Hewitt is concerned, what they're doing is providing implications counselling and intermediary services. And the people that might be referred by the HFEA to the Hewitt Centre are donor-conceived people applying for information about their donor and using donor sibling link, and donors thinking about re-registering and whose identifiable details have been requested. So those are the people that we currently refer. And again, just to remind you, the Hewitt Centre is currently commissioned till September 2024. And yeah, again, just a reminder what we've just been talking about. We don't need to go over this. 2023 is an important year because of the law change in 2005 and the expected increase in demand for the expected increase in applications and the expected increase in demand for support. So just want to flag that there's a requirement that applicants are given a suitable opportunity to receive proper counselling, but there isn't any explicit requirement for the HFEA to provide counselling, which that's something that we have to consider when we're thinking about what we're going to do. And you'll remember in November last year, the authority agreed to consider the role of the HFEA in providing support going forward. Okay, so as I said, I'm just going to outline some of the work that we've been doing, just to kind of give you an indication of where we're up to. So one of the first things we did, go forward actually, we did an international comparison, looking at arrangements in different jurisdictions. We looked at options for different possible arrangements, different ways of generating funding for alternative cost recovery models. We've done some stakeholder engagement, which has involved roundtable meetings, so that's experts in the field and also patient organisations. We issued a short questionnaire, which I'll say a bit more about, gathering the views of those affected by these issues, and we're currently doing some costings work looking at the possible costs of providing support going forwards. So, yeah, just a brief note on this. So we have a look at what's provided in other parts of the world. We looked at 5 countries where support is provided. It's worth noting that there are some other countries where no support is provided at all for those involved in the release of identifying information. Yeah, so I think the thing that I just wanted to flag is that it's not standard worldwide for support services to be funded for free. There are slightly different arrangements in Victoria and Western Australia. There's slightly more provision, and there are some places where there's nothing at all. So again, I'll provide more detail on that in January. Thanks, Julia. So yeah, as I said, we wanted to consider quite a broad range of options so that we can sort of demonstrate that we've thought about this quite carefully. So these are some of the things that we thought about doing. So raising blanket fees potentially to pool to pay for a service. We looked at different versions of charging applicants, people applying for information. We thought about introducing new code of practice guidance or a new licence condition. We also, considered some more left-field things like, adopting or developing a voluntary scheme of some kind, seeking more funding, or even co-writing a grant. So we just wanted to be quite comprehensive in the options that we considered. Move the slide on. So here on this slide, I've summarised some of the challenges around the different options. Again, provide more detail on these models and the issues around them in the January paper, but the important thing to get across is that if there is going to be a support service in the future, that we need to find a way of funding it sustainably and in a legally sound way, and the work that we have done indicates that the only legally secure means of doing this would be to ask for some kind of financial contribution from people who are accessing the support. Next slide, yes, so I've said a bit about this. So we had 2 roundtable meetings in June, and so we split them this way. So we have Asian organisations, so the DCN, the C Trust, the DCR, and another for professionals, practitioners, academics in the field shortly after. And we discussed sort of broadly 2 areas. So one was around the kinds of support that people might want or need. So that might be, the counselling, the sort of standard counselling support, or that might include peer support as well, or signposting, the broad range. And we also discussed with them options for charging applicants, or the implications of charging applicants. And the next slide, there's a few takeaways from those meetings. So some of the things that we heard were that it was important for there to be a range of different types of supports available for different needs. So different people have different needs, and that might depend on age or other things. We heard that peer support was very important and had been used by lots of people. There was a real appetite for a single source, one place that people could go to, so a central hub or toolkit that was reliable, and again signposting to other credible, streamlined, high quality information. There seemed to be a real interest in developing that and improving that. There was recognition that it isn't obviously the HFEA's role to provide this, and that in some ways the HFEA isn't so well placed to provide support. And there was some other things around counselling and the language around counselling and how that might deter people from seeking support, as might the introduction of fees. And I'll send along a note on those meetings in January. So I said we also issued a questionnaire. So just go down, I'm trying to match up my slides with yours. So again, I'm not going into too much detail on the questionnaire, but I'll just go through some of the highlights. The survey was open from 7th of August to 12th of September. We made it quite broad, so we made it open to anyone aged over 16 who'd been personally impacted by the provision of these support services, and we had 270 responses. So, yes, as I said, so we had 270 responses, 254 I think were complete responses. That was a good number. So I just say this before we go through the figures. We're happy with that response rate, but it is still quite a small number overall and not a representative sample. So just wanted to flag that when we're thinking about these results, and just to indicate these are our sort of initial high-level findings. So this is a slide showing you who responded to the survey. So the largest response group were parents of donor-conceived people, followed by donor-conceived people and donors themselves. And these are the main groups that we've considered in the survey analysis. I'll move on. Yeah, thank you. So this is just a bit more of a breakdown of the donors that responded. It might be quite interesting to share with you. So all the donors, 47% were sperm donors, 49% egg donors. There's roughly 50-50. We had 45, I think, donors respond to the survey overall. We're quite pleased with that. Next slide. We asked a question about the kinds of support that respondents had used in the past, and so it's interesting to see here that people had used a range of different supports, so people could tick more than one box, so it wasn't an exclusive option, and lots of people, I think the most common combination of support services used by people was peer support and information and signposting, which is what this slide conveys. Next one. Okay, so we asked this question outright. We asked this in the survey and in the roundtables. There's quite a lot of words on this slide, but essentially we're asking, what would be the preference between having a service commissioned by the HFEA, where people have to pay something towards accessing the support provided by that service, or a system where the HFEA doesn't charge applicants or service users for the service because there is no service, so we don't commission a service. So those are the two things that we asked people to consider. And you can see here that there was a preference for option A, which is the option which we would commission a service. So there was some tension here, I think, with the stakeholder roundtables, where there perhaps was less of an appetite for that, and it was recognised that it wasn't clearly our role to provide a support service. So this is an analysis of, these are just a few quotes. So we had some free text boxes in our survey and asked people to expand on the answers they'd given. So this is quite useful in kind of getting some insight into what people were thinking and why they answered the way they did. So it seems that the HFEA commissioning a service might result in increased confidence and trust in the services, because people want the services to be trustworthy and reliable, and a recognition that counselling and maybe other support needs to be delivered by someone with specialised knowledge, so their expertise involved is important in the context of counselling and support. So we did also ask a question about what people would be willing to pay for support. So this gives you a bit more information on that. It does indicate that there's some willingness to pay for specialist counselling, perhaps more than other services. We asked people in a bit more detail about how much they would be prepared to pay as well, but again, we'll provide a bit more detail on that in the paper in January. So just in summary, the takeaways. So it did seem that from the questionnaire and our other engagement work that a range of services or a multi-layered support service is well suited for people that need support. The people that responded to the survey, quite a small sample number representative, they would like to see the HFEA continue to commission support. This was in slight tension with the roundtables. And there was an appetite for these services to be free, but a recognition that and some willingness to self-fund, or at least partially self-fund, access to those services. And the last thing I wanted to mention was this costing work that's currently underway. So we're developing estimates on the costs of a support service going forward, given the changes in numbers. And just to flag, this is a bit difficult to predict because we were just talking about this, how it's quite hard to have any certainty around the number of people that will apply for information or need support, or even people that whether they know they don't get conceived or not. And again, I'll include that in the January paper. And in January, so I think the meeting's middle to the end of January, I'll submit a paper with more detail on all of these options, including the costings work, and then that's when we'll ask you to make a decision about the support service going forward. Any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Catherine, and then Zainab.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think that collectively all of the work that you've done today puts us in a really good position for being prepared to make an evidence-based decision on the model for provision of future services. So that was very helpful. Just building on your summary, it seemed to me that there were 4 very strong themes that came out of the combination of the stakeholder research and the questionnaire, which I accept is limited in its scope, but nonetheless very useful, particularly the qualitative feedback that you gave us. And the first was the real importance of a single source of information, primarily or preferably commissioned by the HFEA, to guarantee quality and consistency. But I thought also the point about the sensitivity of the information that's being conveyed and the sensitivity and vulnerability of those who might be accessing it was also something that came through very strongly. Second for me was the access to the importance of peer support. The third was the importance of information signposting. And the fourth was really about the whole question of potential willingness to accept a responsibility for self-funding. And I don't think we should be too concerned about the fact that the majority of people who've received a free service to date are necessarily going to say, in preference, we'd like it to continue as free. I think the more significant piece of evidence is the fact that we've got quite a clear indication in the questionnaire that there would be negligible deterrence to those who do choose to seek it, and very, relatively small percentage do. But to those who do really want it, it doesn't seem that having to pay towards it would be a deterrent. So I thought that those were all really useful principles to keep in my mind coming forward to what the presenters with in January. And the only other question that was raised in my mind was that in the potential funding models, we put forward the idea that one can make a bid to the department to consider some kind of central funding of ongoing provision in the way that you outlined in Western Australia, for example. You can international comparatives there and elsewhere. And whether there's any indication of a response from the department about whether that's something that departmentally would be considered.
So, do you want me to answer that? Well, maybe the part on the department, just to agree with your observations. I think that summarises it very well, and it was really interesting to hear people endorse and agree on the need to improve information. People seemed, would it be fair to say, perhaps almost more interested and more concerned about the provision of high quality information and having a single trustworthy source. That was a really strong theme. The point about central government funding, maybe, I don't know if that's something that just switch my sorry.
The commission of the service dates back quite a few years, and at the time it was that this was a HFEA funded. Obviously there's no statutory duty for us to provide it or to fund it, but this was from the HFEA. As we've heard earlier about budgets are tight, GA funding is reduced. It's not something that we would consider at the moment going and asking outrightly for it. Maybe if we decide not to go forward with it at all, that's obviously a conversation in the future, but we just felt at this moment in time it wasn't something that we could take forward and be a realistic ask.
Okay, thank you. Zainab.
Thank you, Anna, for that presentation, and thank you to the team for all that work. It's really interesting. I mean, I think one of the points is that, of course, the questionnaire might have certain biases within it. An HFEA-based questionnaire, its respondents are more likely to say, we'd like the HFEA to coordinate something, possibly. I was a little bit curious as to specifically what might have been meant by peer support by people. Might some people have just meant talking to a friend when they talked about peer support, in which case that might explain why there was such high levels of people accessing peer support.
We did.
Sorry. I had. Do you want to just respond to that and then I'll carry on? Or?
I can. Well, we did include a definition of peer support such that it would have excluded that just talking to your friend. I don't have it on my screen at the moment, but I can look it up. It was so. What we mean by peer support is, kind of groups. It would be volunteer-led, but it would be administrated by some kind of interested organisation. So the Donor Conception Network and the DCR, but even maybe Facebook groups and that kind of thing. But I think it wouldn't have included just talking to a friend. We tried to exclude that. Obviously, you never really know what's in people's minds when they're responding, but we sort of did our best to define that.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. In which case it might be interesting to think about whether some of that support was specific to this issue or whether those people are part of that supportive community anyway. But I was wondering if we could, for the January meeting, and my apologies if this was covered in September or anything like that, or indeed before and my brain has completely forgotten it, but it might be really interesting for the January meeting if we could see some numbers on what percentage or what number of the OTR applicants at the moment are accessing support. And if it might at all be possible, I don't know if this is too burdensome for your teams, but if it might be possible to get some feedback, even if it's just a couple of words of free text or something, from the actual users to say, it was invaluable to have this support before actually meeting my donor, or I wouldn't have had the courage, or, actually I didn't particularly need this support, but because it was there I took it. Just to have something from that specific group could be really informative. And I think I'd just like to make a bid that once we go about implementing whatever decisions implemented, it would be really important that we follow up with data, the impact of that, and then build into it some sort of review. So we can check maybe after a year whether the numbers have dropped, whether the numbers have increased, and whether we can get some kind of feedback from users in terms of satisfaction. Because it might be something that's quite different in actual application and use than what people might imagine or intuit. So it'd be really nice to have that sort of built into how we go about doing this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. That's that would be a useful thing to do. I can say a bit about the proportion of applicants who currently access support. I think it's quite low. I think it's around 7 or 8%. It would be good to get some information from the Hewitt about how people rate the services, or how people have how it has affected them positively. We did have a question in our questionnaire on that, on how useful did you find the support that you've used. Obviously, that was our questionnaire was quite it was open to everyone, so it wasn't just users of the Hewitt. There are potentially some issues around data sharing with the Hewitt, because that's their patient information, but I think they do collect information on feedback on their services. But yeah, that's something that I can take away and think about.
Alison.
Thank you for updating us. I wonder for costings for the January meeting, if we could have a look at what HFEA actually can do and should do around about the opening the register, what the cost of that's going to be to make sure that we can actually fulfil that requirement, and also including in that what cost would be for the HFEA to create the central hub and information and signposting, so that that's all tied in with opening the register, and then the actual external support out with the HFEA, because I think it's quite clear we cannot take that on board. So I think if we could look at what does the HFEA need to do for statutory requirements, and bearing in mind that there is a huge trust in the HFEA data, so we have to make sure that the opening register is robust and fully resourced, so that we can do our bit, but then the support comes elsewhere. Thank you.
We're not questioning the OTR resources and funding for that, so that is completely separate, and that's not something that we could necessarily produce for January. That's something that obviously is to do with headcount and organisational wide. What we can do is show you the cost of the service going forward and what spend to date is, and that needs to be considered separately to OTR entirely, because the OTR is the statutory bit. This is the bit that we don't have to do, and we have no obligation to provide. We have done today.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? No? Anna, thank you very much. That was very helpful. We look forward to seeing you again in January. those of you who've been looking at your agenda know that we should have had a break. I'm going to crack on because, just to remind you, as Peter said at the beginning of the meeting, the Public Bodies Review has not been published, and there was quite a bit of time in this meeting to discuss it, which we obviously can't now. So we will finish early, and I think if that's all right with everybody, we'll just crack on and do that. Yeah, okay. We'll get chocolate from Ali afterwards. Okay, so... gosh, I can't believe I'm actually saying this. Final report on add-ons. We finally launched the updated rating system for the treatment of add-ons, which I think marks the very successful conclusion of a really long journey. And I think it's worth saying a huge thank you to Tim as chair of SCAC and the whole SCAC committee, together with Dina and all the internal team, because it's really been quite a journey to get there, and I think we've got a really good result. And this is the final sort of report to explain to you, and I'm going to ask Dina to take us through it.
Treatment add-ons have been a key strategic aim for the Authority for quite some time now. Last year, the Authority met and agreed to move to a 5-category rating scale. In addition to rating live birth rate for the general population, it was agreed that we would rate additional outcomes and additional specific populations. So last month, as you're aware, the new ratings and patient information went live. And as Julia said, this completed 2 years of working together with SCAC members, patients, patient staff, clinics, stakeholders and academic experts to provide some more useful information for patients so that they are able to make better informed decisions about the use of treatment add-ons as part of their fertility treatment. Alongside the new patient information, an updated consensus statement also went live, in which the HFEA and 8 professional and patient bodies have repeated their commitment to the responsible use of treatment add-ons. Alongside the launch, there were several comms activities. All PRs, persons responsible for licensed treatment clinics, were notified of the updates via a letter from Tim and Peter. Our social media posts were well received across all of our platforms and have seen some very positive comments about the new ratings. In addition, on the go live date, there were more than 1,000 visits to the updated add-ons information on our website. And between the period of the 19th of October, which was the go live date, and the end of October, there were almost 50,000 visits to the website. And on the go live date, we had over 270 pieces of media coverage, and that stretched from national print and online to regional and local titles. And most of the coverage contained our key messages and as well as supportive comments, which is great. And then we also had some broadcast coverage. So we're now going to look at various next steps so that we can continue to move towards providing consistent and transparent approach to the use of treatment add-ons in fertility services. We're going to continue to promote our add-ons information across our social media platforms, and we'll be regularly reposting some of our social media posts. We're also going to review our BAU processes for reviewing the evidence base for treatment add-ons and how we add new add-ons to that list. And we'll work with the SCAC on this. And then we'll also continue to monitor new sources of evidence, of reviewed evidence. For example, the ESHRE guidelines that were published, and also Cochrane reviews, which will be regularly updated, just to make sure that kind of the messaging is aligned and it's not confusing for patients and things like that. And we'll continue to monitor the potential for any collaborative opportunities. So we're already in ongoing conversations with VARTA, which is the fertility regulator in Victoria, Australia, who have similar concerns around the offering of treatment add-ons and are considering developing information of their own, evidence-based information of their own for patients. So to continue to make an effort to collaborate and to make sure that our information is not conflicting with other patient information out there, whether that's nationally or internationally. So the authority are asked to note the work undertaken, to update the add-ons rating information and the suggested next steps.
Great, thank you. Has anybody got any quick? Tim, do you want to make some?
Just want to sort of formally for the record to note the amazing amount of work done on this by Dina, predecessor, the authority members on SCAC, the external advisors and the executive generally. It was a huge amount of work, particularly last bit, very tight timetables. So just I had the easy part, I think, chairing it. It was good by others, so thank you very much.
Great. Geeta.
Just once again, congratulations to the team that worked really hard on this very difficult subject. Just a question for me is how we circulated the new list relating to, for example, CMA, and also most importantly to ICBs and all that. We're still concerned about whether add-ons are being used for NHS patients. And they're being charged, so just the new list in the ratings to send to ICBs and commissioning bodies and commissioners. What useful, I think, in my view.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we have circulated to them, but we
Catherine.
Just to echo that, I think this is a huge credit to all the work that's been put in collaboratively over 2 years. I thought it was just wonderful to see consistency in our ratings with those from Cochrane and HFEA, which gives an enormous stamp of credibility. So, in a sense, having said that, I suppose my question is a little bit perverse, but given that I know that collectively we're all very much committed to continuous improvement, is there anything that we have learned in terms of lessons learned from this very, very positive experience that we're going to carry through as we think about the development of the next strategy and the way that we work in the future as regulators?
Do you want to go then, mate?
Just coming on one specific, and I know Dean or Tim or Jason would say more eloquently than me, in terms of the process of looking at the evidence and looking at that on a periodic basis. We're already using the lessons learned from that into our horizon scanning process, which we do on an annual basis. So we're already kind of learning some of the, we're already implementing some of the lessons learned from the process in terms of how we're changing our behaviours going forward. That's a quite specific example.
And just to add, I think so. It's a terrific process, and I echo everybody. My thanks enormously to all involved. But it is a time-consuming process. So I think what's really important here is not just adopting this as a way of doing policy in future, because the risk is then actually certain quite small pieces of work become enormously long and involved pieces of work, but actually being more deliberate, I think, before pieces of work and asking ourselves questions about what kind of policy model suits what particular piece of work. And the first iteration of add-ons, a long time back now, was genuinely new, not just new here, but new across the world. What we've had is a refinement, and I think that refinement is not just expressed in terms of the, if you like, more subtle public rating measure, but also a refinement actually of the underlying policy process that went with it. And a lot of that has been about actually being more explicit about showing our workings out, if you like. That first process was a very thorough review, but I think externally you wouldn't have been able to judge that in quite the same way as you would now. Whereas I think the combination of very detailed minutes, long explicit lists of bits of evidence reviewed, the more attention paid to explaining to the public the particular checks and balances in that system, how much of that was work we did internally, how much of that was the view of an expert statistician, how much of the work was the SCAC committee that Tim led, and so on. And I think all of that, for something like this, where you're starting to marry, if you like, regulatory rules or public information along with day-to-day clinical practice, it's absolutely right. And there will be other occasions where that kind of process is absolutely right. But I think what we shouldn't do, we occasionally have conversations, don't we, in the office, which is a sort of, are you gold plating this? well, this was quite a good piece of gold plating, but I don't think we should automatically assume, just because it was particularly rigorous and thorough and all the rest of it, it's not right for everything. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think we've arrived at a model which for certain sorts of interventions is exactly what we should be doing, but we need to be asking quite an explicit question about, does the issue warrant this kind of very resource-heavy approach, or is there actually a more appropriate way of doing it? But I think we learnt a lot, and I'm very welcome actually that others have entered the field.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be had. Like you, Catherine, I draw considerable comfort from the fact that despite different methodologies, different people have ended up broadly in the same place. And if over time there is efficiencies we can wrest from, it would seem, wouldn't it, that if, say, a regulatory body, an authority in Australia is looking at the scientific evidence and we're looking at the scientific evidence, that's a kind of process we could even think about combining, because hopefully we would come to pretty similar conclusions given the nature of the exercise we're doing. So, not only do I think this particular work is very positive, I think it sets us up rather well, actually, for future opportunities.
Other things. Yeah. Great.
Just an additional one. Yes, Peter, that's really quite good to hear about Australia looking at it. I just wonder whether we have had any reaction from the sector following this publication, and also are we going to be looking at collecting information about adults used in patient treatment cycles? Is that something discussion that we'll be having?
To be able to collect any information that obviously then comes through PRISM or whatever system you use into our register, and it was agreed through the Information for Quality project, which was some years ago, to an agreed data dictionary, which allowed us to have certain fields that we asked for. At the time when we did it, I was involved when I was in the sector on that group, and there was a feeling to cut back on the amount of information at the time that the HFEA was receiving. But we do hear different attitudes in the sector now and the usefulness of being able to collect extra data. So once PRISM is totally embedded, we've got Kafka done, and we know that that's stable, that's the time that we can then potentially address the data dictionary and consult what we could collect.
In terms of feedback, we haven't had any negative feedback. I'll take that, and we know that if clinics weren't happy, we would be the first to know. So I don't know if colleagues in the sector have heard anything more specific.
No. That's good. Okay, so now we come to any other business. I'm going to go around the table, and I've got a few things. Does anybody? Okay. So I just wanted to sort of report that as we do once a year now, authority members came last night, and we got together for dinner, but also to discuss the beginning of a discussion about setting the strategy for 2025-28. Because if you recall, we agreed at one of our previous meetings that given everything that was going on at the time, we would run our existing strategy for one more year. And then we spent this morning also starting to have discussions about that. Next steps is that Paul is going to draw on put together some more things for us to think about, given the work we did last night and this morning, and that eventually that strategy will be a sort of strategy document that comes to this board for approval. But I think it was a worthwhile thing to do, and what we do is we get together once a year like this, and then we have a sort of touch point at the 6 months point to see how we're all doing. But I think it's very helpful as a sort of an exercise in getting authority members together to spend a little bit more time when we're not just sort of sitting around a board table, and very useful discussions. So thank you to everyone who participated in that. I know it's a bit of extra time, but I think it's well worth it, and there were good discussions. The second thing is I just discovered by chance that it's actually Mary Warnock's 100th birthday next year in 2024. And I'm not quite sure what, if anything, we want to do to mark it or to partner with another organisation to mark it, but I sort of just put it out there for people to think about because it's quite a milestone. And if anybody should celebrate Mary Warnock's 100th birthday, it's probably us. And so I think it'd be good to maybe ask the exec as well, we can think about something that we might want to do. And finally, this is Jason's last formal board meeting. His term of office ends mid-January 2024, just before the next board meeting. Obviously we have a huge thank you to Jason for his contribution, but I'm delighted to say that he's agreed to stay on as a sort of expert advisor to the authority until we've gone through the appointments process and we have somebody else with his skill base to join the board, so for at least a few months, and also that he will stay on as a member of SCAC for the next year. Which will be hugely helpful to everybody. So we're really grateful to him for deciding to do that. As a result of Jason stepping down, he won't be sitting on Statutory Approvals Committee anymore, but I'm delighted that Christine Watson is joining that committee, and Jason will also be stepping down from AGC, and I will be stepping up as an interim member of AGC just until we appoint somebody else to that committee. And apart from that, I promised Catherine I would give one more shout out. She already mentioned it earlier today to the training session on best practice in governance on the 7th of December, 1:15 to 2:45. Please let Ali know if you'd like to attend either in person or online, because it's a good. Right, anybody got anything else? No? Thank you all very much, and thank you to everybody who's joined online, and have a wonderful winter break. Happy New Year when we finally get to it. It's much sooner than you think, and we will see everybody in January.
Thank you.
Thank you.